Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are diving into a deeply profound psychological reality. Why moving away doesn't mean you've moved on. We're going to completely shatter the illusion of distance. Let's jump right into a scenario that might feel a little uncomfortably familiar.
Picture this. You live in a brand new city, or hey, maybe even an entirely new country. You've built a life that is completely 100% your own. You've got your own career, your own friends, your own apartment. You are entirely financially and logistically independent. You might only see your family once a year during the holidays, or maybe you rarely speak to them at all. From the outside looking in, you are the absolute picture of a self-sufficient adult who has successfully flown the coop. You are free. Or at least, that is the story you tell yourself.
But here is the silent, deeply frustrating reality that brings us to the central question of this whole explainer. Why does a single, casual text message from home cause a multi-day emotional collapse? I mean, you know the exact feeling I'm talking about here. You're sitting in your beautiful, independent life, your phone buzzes with just an offhand remark from a parent, and suddenly you are spiraling. Your heart starts racing, you spend the next 3 days having these endless, aggressive, totally imaginary arguments with them in your head while you're taking a shower or driving to work. Despite thousands of miles of geographic distance, your emotional system is instantly hijacked. It's like you never left.
This brings us to what clinical psychology refers to as the sociological illusion of the geographical cure. For decades, we've been sold this idea that if we just run away, if we just put enough zip codes, time zones, or literal oceans between us and our family system, we'll naturally achieve freedom. But the hard truth? Geography does not cure psychology. Packing your bags is a logistical change. It is not an internal transformation. What you're doing is using geography to fake a sense of independence. You've changed your address, sure, but you haven't actually changed your underlying psychological wiring.
Now, to really unpack this, we need to introduce a crucial concept from family systems theory called emotional cutoff. This is defined as the distancing of a relationship, either physically or emotionally, in reaction to intense tension or anxiety. Now, I want to be incredibly clear about something right up front. This is not a pathology. We are absolutely not judging this, and we aren't saying it's inherently wrong. Emotional cutoff is a deeply instinctual, temporary shield. When you're drowning in a family system's anxiety and you just don't yet have the internal psychological tools to maintain your own identity in that room, your survival instinct kicks in. It says, "Get me out of here." You sever the connection just to get some emotional breathing space. It's a highly effective shield for immediate survival. Murray Bowen, who is a true pioneer in family systems theory, brilliantly illustrates the hidden cost of relying solely on that shield. He notes that the life pattern of cutoffs is determined by the way people handle their unresolved emotional attachments to their parents. Let's really think about that. When you use physical distance to cut off, you do experience immense immediate relief. The tension naturally drops because the source of the stress is literally out of sight. But the underlying emotional fusion, that deep, unresolved, highly reactive attachment, it remains completely untouched. You haven't resolved the anxiety, you've just walked out of the room where it happens. You are still carrying the raw vulnerability to that family system deep within you, no matter where you go. So, the absolutely crucial point here is understanding the vast, vast difference between a physical shield and true psychological freedom. On one hand, you have physical distance. That's your shield. It protects you from the immediate, overwhelming tension of being in the same physical space as your family. It stops the bleeding. But true freedom, that is psychological differentiation. Differentiation isn't about how many miles away you live. It's an entirely internal state. It's the capacity to be in contact with your family without losing your mind, without losing your boundaries, and most importantly, without losing yourself. Physical distance requires you to actively avoid them. Psychological differentiation means you no longer need to avoid them to feel entirely safe and secure in who you are.
This illusion of distance builds into what we can think of as the ghost in the machine. Why do you still react so intensely when you're sitting completely alone in your apartment, thousands of miles away from the people who raised you? It's because they aren't just back in their hometown anymore. They are inside your head. You have inadvertently imported their emotional system across borders. You might be geographically alone in your living room, but psychologically speaking, that room is incredibly crowded.
Clinical psychologist Lindsay C. Gibson perfectly captures exactly how this happens. She points out that as children, we absorb our parents' opinions and beliefs in the form of an inner voice that keeps up an ongoing commentary. Clinical observation actually shows us that our left brain literally imports the critical or anxious parental voice. It becomes the invisible software running in your background, constantly dictating your self-worth. That judgmental logic, Those moralistic evaluations of whether you're being good or bad based on their unspoken rules, you carry that with you every single day. So when that text message arrives, it doesn't just ping your phone. It activates the ghost in the machine. It wakes up the internalized parent living directly inside your own neural pathways.
Which leads us to a psychologically piercing question you really have to ask yourself. Are you still running your life in reactive rebellion against their ghost? I want you to think about this deeply for a moment. If your parents demanded you become a lawyer, and so you purposely became a starving artist just to spite them, they're still choosing your career. You're just choosing the exact opposite of their demand. Rebellion is not independence. Rebellion is just obedience in reverse. If your life choices are merely a reaction against that internalized voice, you're still mentally enslaved to it. Your choices aren't truly yours yet. You're just playing a game of tug of war with a ghost.
This really brings us to the profound distinction between the role self and the true self. In emotionally intense or highly anxious family systems, children survive by adopting a role self. Maybe you were the peacekeeper or the overachiever, the invisible one or the rebel. You figured out exactly what the system needed you to be to either keep the peace or get some attention, and you sacrificed your spontaneous true self to play that specific part. When you merely move away without doing the deep internal work, you take that role self right along with you. You're still mentally intertwined with those unspoken expectations, constantly anticipating how you should act, rather than actually discovering who you are.
And this brings us to the ultimate goal, the real work, differentiation of self. This is the true, liberating alternative to merely using geographical cutoff as a crutch. Differentiation is defined as the capacity to maintain emotional objectivity and individuality while in the midst of an emotional system. What does that actually mean? It means you can literally sit at the wildly chaotic family Thanksgiving table, observe the anxiety, observe the manipulation flying around the room, and just not catch it. You don't get infected by the emotional virus in the room. You remain a separate, solid, and completely grounded individual.
Let's really slow down and contrast how this looks in practice. First, there's the pseudo-self. This self is borrowed, it's highly negotiable, and it is intensely reactive. The pseudo-self relies heavily on external validation. When it gets pressured by family, it either completely collapses and complies, or it aggressively cuts off and runs away. By contrast, look at the solid self. The solid self is stable, it's principle-based, and it's totally non-reactive. It is formed slowly from within. The solid self knows exactly what it believes, what it stands for, and what it will or will not do. It doesn't need to yell, it doesn't need to flee, it just holds its ground calmly.
So what are the quiet, profound markers of true differentiation? First, remaining emotionally objective. This means you can observe your family's behavior kind of like a scientist observing an experiment, rather than a victim taking it all personally. Second, acting on deeply held principles, not reacting out of anxiety. Third, and honestly this one is huge, no longer aggressively defending your choices. The solid self doesn't need to convince its parents that its choices are right, it simply lives them. And finally, relinquishing the need to fix or change others. You realize their emotional immaturity is their reality, not your project to solve. You just stop fighting those imaginary battles.
Consider this really profound reality. A differentiated self is one who can maintain emotional objectivity while in the midst of an emotional system in turmoil. Real psychological maturity is remaining emotionally separate without needing to flee the room. You don't need the shield of physical distance anymore, because your own psychology has become its own impenetrable boundary. You can be connected to people who are completely drowning in their own emotional storms, but you no longer feel compelled to jump into the water and drown with them.
So, how do we actually achieve this? Here is a sophisticated step-by-step framework for shifting from an external geographical shield to internal psychological freedom. Step 1. Recognize the internalized parental voice. When you feel that massive anxiety spike from a text message, pause. Identify that the critical voice in your head is an imported echo. It's not your own true thought. Step 2. Interrupt the automatic emotional reaction. Yes, mammals have an instinctual stress response, but you have a higher cortical brain. You can choose to pause the reactivity. Take a breath. And step 3. Act from your defined solid self. Respond based on your core principles, not out of fear, guilt, or rebellious anger.
This brings us to the immense psychological weight of our core thesis today. Physical distance can protect you, but psychological differentiation is what frees you. Look, it is entirely valid and sometimes absolutely necessary to use physical distance to protect yourself when you're building your strength. Never shame yourself for needing that shield. But understand that the shield is just the beginning of the journey. The ultimate destination, true, unshakable maturity, means arriving at an internal state where the ghost in the machine is finally fully silenced.
So I want to leave you with this stark, provocative thought to shatter the illusion we started with. Look at your independent life. Look at the thousands of miles you've put between yourself and your past. Have you moved on, or have you just moved away? It's a deep, incredibly liberating question, because the very moment you realize that true freedom isn't found in a new zip code, but in the quiet, unshakable solidity of your own differentiated self, well, that is the moment you actually begin to live your own life. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive in This Explainer. Keep reflecting, keep growing, and I'll catch you next time.